How should we break eggs? The question is, so what? The question, so what, is used in English to mean, why is your point so important? I'm sure virtually every language has a similar frequently asked question. In the case of Christians and Muslims, a major issue that divides us is the Trinity and whether or not Jesus is God. Muslims deem the idea of the Trinity to be blasphemous. Christians deem the rejection of the Trinity to be heresy. This issue has caused atrocious hostilities between Christians and Muslims. People who take their faith in the only true God seriously have killed each other over this issue. How tragic. Regarding this issue that has so violently separated us even to this day, I ask the provocative question, so what? To be clear, the Christian Church has taught the doctrine of the Trinity for some 2,000 years. It is an important belief for most Christians, and Muslims vehemently reject the doctrine of the Trinity. Nevertheless, is this issue so important that it justifies divisions, hatred, and violence among God-fearing people who take their faith in God seriously? My answer is no. In the satirical novel, Gulliver's Travels, written in 1726 by the Christian pastor Jonathan Swift, he tells the story of 4 voyages made by Lemuel Gulliver. In his first voyage, Gulliver is washed up on the shores of the imaginary nation of Lilliput after a shipwreck. He is taken prisoner by a race of tiny people less than 6 inches tall. He finds that the Lilliputians are in a war with the empire of Blefuscu. The cause of their hostilities is the question of which end of an egg should be broken, this being a matter of religious doctrine. Jonathan Swift tells us the story of this particular voyage in his novel to criticize, among other things, the religious differences among Christians about how a person should be baptized. The 3 methods being by pouring, sprinkling, and immersion. A so what issue that also divides Christians to this day. Regarding the question of the Trinity and the deity of Christ, either Christians are wrong or Muslims are wrong. The question is, so what? Should it make a difference? There were numerous views about the nature of Jesus Christ during the first 4 centuries of the Christian church. Some believed that Jesus was God, others did not. During the First Council of Nicaea in the year 325 AD, the debate about the nature of Christ was very contentious. The scholar Robert Payne wrote a treatise entitled The Holy Fire, the story of the early centuries of the Christian church in the Near East. Regarding the Council of Nicaea, he wrote, "At once the Arians and the anti-Arians were at one another's throats. Denunciations and angry accusations flew across the hall. Everyone was suddenly arguing. There was a wild waving of arms. It was like a battle in the dark," the historian Socrates said later. Hardly anyone seemed to know the grounds on which they calumniated one another. These were the zealots that decreed in the 4th century that Jesus was God. Until this decision, there were at least a dozen views about the nature of Jesus Christ. Yet people holding these various views called themselves Christians. They were all people who took their faith in God seriously. Did they ever get to the truth? One thing is certain, we will all find the answer to this question when we stand before God in judgment. In the meantime, I contend that we have no good basis for being so dogmatic on this issue, given the wild and crazy contentious zealots, mere humans who made their decision by a popular vote in 325 AD. So I believe this issue is one of those that prompts a divine wink. In the New Testament book of Acts, chapter 30, when the Apostle Paul addressed the Greek polytheists and idolaters at the Areopagus on Mars Hill, he said nothing to criticize their religion. In fact, he complimented them for being very religious. When he saw they had an altar to the unknown God, he began the most extensive sermon recorded in the book of Acts, or in the New Testament, where he says in Acts 17:23, "For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God, whom therefore you ignorantly worship. Him declare I unto you." Paul said nothing about the deity of Christ or about Jesus being the only Son of God. In fact, he said in verses 29 to 31, "Forasmuch then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone graven by art and man's device. And the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he hath appointed a day in the which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man, Jesus Christ, whom he hath ordained, wherewith he hath given assurance unto all men, in that he raised him from the dead." I emphasize the following. Paul said nothing about the deity of Christ. He referred to Jesus Christ as a man. He revealed that God gave a divine wink at the ignorance that led these Greek philosophers into polytheism and idolatry. And he referred to the resurrection of Christ, but only to give these Greek philosophers assurance that there is life after death. Both Muslims and Christians agree that polytheism and idolatry are blasphemous, and yet God was willing to give a divine wink at the polytheism and idolatry that Paul encountered on Mars Hill. So, if God was willing to give a divine wink at these Greeks for their idolatry and polytheism, surely he would also give a divine wink at our different views about the Trinity and the deity of Christ. What is truly necessary is that Muslims and Christians alike recognize the supreme importance of our submission to and worship of the only true God of the universe. There is no significant differences in how Christians and Muslims live our daily lives in submission to God. I believe God gives a divine wink at the doctrinal differences that separate us, so we should not let such doctrinal differences divide us as people who take our faith in God seriously. So I contend regarding the question of Christ's deity, so what? It doesn't matter how we break our eggs. We should no longer live in the fictitious nation of Lilliput. We must refuse to be enemies. Please read my book, A Divine Wink, When Love and Religion Become Rivals. Get it at www.adivinewink.com.